That's right, Jeff. He's visiting not one, not two, but three countries in the Horn of Africa. I guess the question that needs to be asked and the question that will be asked is how important is this region to France? The French president is, however, in Kenya today, the latest stop on his Africa tour. His trip is focusing on investment and security in an increasingly strategic region. The French leader will also attend the UN Environment Assembly in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. He will co-chair the One Planet Summit with Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta. Macron's office says Kenya is the only African nation to reach the goal of making renewable energy 75% of its energy mix. Macron and Kenyatta are expected to discuss the ongoing extremist threat in the region as well as transport and economic projects. All right, we are joined by Dr. Francis Onditi, HSRC Fellow with the African Institute in South Africa. He's also an AISA member based in Pretoria, as well as head of Department of School of International Relations and Diplomacy, Riara University here in Kenya. Doctor, thank you for joining us, and a whole lot of questions that we need to be answered from you. First of all, we talked about his visit to the Horn of Africa, three particular nations. How important is this region to France? Can you unpack that for us?
Richard, France, interest in Africa, especially in the Horn of Africa, is really based on French, foreign policy, which is la francophonie. The interest in the Horn of Africa is pegged on a number of factors, but I look at three things that might be important. One, Djibouti, which is one of the countries that it's visiting, is the only country in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, where France has a base, military base. The surveillance and other military operation that France would want to monitor in Africa is actually based in Djibouti, which is still in the Horn of Africa. But Kenya, when Kenya changed the defense policy 5 years ago to send soldiers in Somalia and also participate in different peace enforcement actions, I think that attracted France a lot. And because the la francophonie policy of France is so much pegged on in military interventions, and this is what they do in different parts of Africa. But finally, which is very, very critical for France, is Ethiopia. Ethiopia being the base of African Union and a hub of activities in the region, it makes it natural, a hub for France to extend its foreign policy in Africa. So, when you look at the change of French policy from just focusing on former colonies to former British colonies, it's something which has been happening for the last decades or even 15 years, because they realize that they need to extend their arm also to what we call the Anglophone countries. And the Horn of Africa, Kenya, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and other countries fall within that category. So I see the relation that is rising between France and countries in Horn of Africa pegged on the foreign policy, but also the changing environment, strategic environment in Kenya vis-a-vis Somalia, the changing environment in the Horn of Africa, and also, the Chinese factor, because China is becoming more powerful, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but specifically in the Horn of Africa with the Silk Road network that they are establishing. So that is somehow also creating some kind of a jittery or a balance, and any country naturally would want to be part of this development in Africa.
All right, let's talk about Kenya. This is the first visit by a French president since 1963. How important is that, not just for Kenya, but also for France?
Richard, as Ali said, France would have not come to Kenya if Kenya did not change the Kenyan defense and foreign policy 5 years ago. Because basically, France is front of, military intervention. So when Kenya decided that we would want to participate in the global enforcement, de-radicalization, and demilitarization, especially in Somalia, that attracted countries like France a lot. But beside that, you know, the trajectory the French country has in Kenya has been pegged on development cooperation. We know that France is one of the countries that has established research institutions in Kenya. We know that millions and millions of students or thousands of students from Kenya actually have their studies in France. What we call the linguistic cooperation that has been going on for many years in this country with France. So there are quite a lot of things, but I think the major strategic epicenter of this cooperation is the military activities that Kenya has involved in within the umbrella of AMISOM. And we are likely to see not just the military pact being signed between President Uhuru and Macron, but also development initiatives, training, exchange programs for students in France, but also, more importantly, the research institutions that they have established in this country perhaps are likely to have more and more cooperation with local institutions in Kenya.
All right. Well, you've mentioned Djibouti a little earlier on.
Yeah.
President Macron has signed deals in Djibouti, Ethiopia. What kind of deal is he likely to sign right here in Kenya?
It's not different from what he has done in Ethiopia and Djibouti. I see three things coming out strongly. One is the military cooperation, especially the technical support in terms of surveillance. France is one of the countries in the world that has a lot of experience in insurgency, fighting insurgency in West Africa. So that kind of asset, Kenya would want to build on that as the country continues to contribute to AMISOM. But there is, as I said earlier, the issues of research and training cooperation between the two countries. I think we're going to see that strengthened, but more importantly, the trading relation between the two countries, especially value addition, in terms of how much do Kenya export to France, but not just export in its raw form, but value addition would be something that President Uhuru perhaps would want to see whether France can strengthen, the value chain within the two countries. But lastly, I think the linguistic cooperation between Kenya and France, because French is one of the languages that they use to advance their foreign policy. And therefore, we would want to see President Uhuru and President Macron moving in that direction. Perhaps they would want to see more Kenyans, students going to France, more establishment of the French language, but also establishment or strengthening of research institutions that France has in Africa, particularly in Kenya. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Francis Onditi, thank you for your insights. We certainly appreciate your analysis.